Okay, so moving on to the adaptive immune system. In this one, we're going to talk about the two different branches of the adaptive immune system, as well as initiation of the adaptive immune response when pathogens get detected. So the adaptive immune response is specific to a particular antigen, but it takes time to take effect. So that's different to the innate immune response, which is able to take effect immediately, but it's not specific, it just targets any antigen that it can find. So, antigen specific. It provides an immunological memory to pathogens in the form of memory B cells, and this results in pathogen immunity because these memory B cells will differentiate into plasma cells if they ever come into contact with the same antigen again. These plasma cells are going to produce the antibodies needed to opsonize the pathogen the antigen came from, and we'll be able to get rid of the infection fairly easily. The two branches of the adaptive immune response are the cellular adaptive response and the humoral adaptive response. The cellular adaptive response focuses on intracellular pathogens or cancer cells, and the humoral adaptive response targets extracellular pathogens present in the bloodstream or on mucosal surfaces. So you can imagine the cellular adaptive response, because it targets stuff intracellularly, that's going to be mainly your CD8 plus cytotoxic T cells being involved there to eradicate viral pathogens, because viral pathogens tend to replicate within the cell, and then your humoral adaptive response is going to be targeting stuff like bacteria that proliferate extracellularly, like we talked about in the first video. So, getting on to actually some of the lymphoid cells in the adaptive immune system, we have these things called helper T cells, which are defined by having a co-receptor called CD4 next to their T cell receptor. So you can see on the image to the right here, the blue cell is the helper T cell, the CD4 plus T cell. This orange receptor that we can see is the T cell receptor, which all T cells have, and these helper T cells are defined by having the CD4 co-receptor shown here in green next to their T cell receptor, and that basically means that's basically what characterizes the helper T cells. And then these T cell receptors and the CD4 plus co-receptor, they form a complex with MHC class II molecules on antigen presenting cells if they have a antigen presented on them. So these helper T cells actually play a role in both the cellular and humoral adaptive responses, with Th1 T helper cells guiding the adaptive response towards a cellular profile, and Th2 helper T cells providing an adaptive response for a humoral profile. So cellular profile, talking about antigens within the cell, so that's going to be your cellular adaptive response. Humoral profile, antigens present extracellularly, so humoral adaptive response. Helper T cells also play specialized roles in the humoral profile, specifically Th17 helper T cells. These immune responses must be effectively regulated so that we don't get unnecessary tissue damage and these CD4 plus and CD8 plus T cells don't target our own cells, and they're regulated with these things called regulatory T cells, called Tregs for short. and they sort out that entire process. So for the initiation of the adaptive immunity, first an antigen-presenting cell initiates the adaptive immune response by presenting antigens to either the CD4 plus T cells, which we talked about before, the helper T cells, and the helper T cells generally kind of pick up extracellular pathogens, so they're more focused on the humoral adaptive response. And then you've got the CD8 plus cytotoxic T cells, which are basically, they're pretty much the exact same, they're the exact same concept, except the co-receptor for cytotoxic T cells is CD8, and instead of forming a complex with MHC class 2 on the antigen presenting cell like helper T cells do, cytotoxic T cells form a they associate with MHC class 1 on the antigen presenting cell. So this is the same kind of concept that we were talking about before with our PRRs, our pathogen recognition receptors, but just make note that toll-like receptors aren't involved in the adaptive immune response. Toll-like receptors are specific to the innate immune system. So MHC just stands for major histocompatibility complex. Major antigen presenting cells, so these cells with the MHC class 1, MHC class 2, are dendritic cells and macrophages, but B cells can also do this. And these dendritic cells and macrophages, like we talked about when we talked about the cells of the innate immune system, they pick up these antigens in the peripheral tissues, and then they transport these tissues to the lymph nodes or other parts of the body where they can be picked up by lymphoid cells. So dendritic cells absorb antigens and present them on their cell surface in association with MHC class 1 and MHC class 2. These dendritic cells then migrate through the lymph or the blood to the lymph nodes where they present the antigens to T cells, and then these T cells undergo differentiation if they have a variable region that's able to, on their T cell receptor, that's able to recognize the specific antigen. They then take that antigen to what's called the dark region of a lymph node, and this initiates clonal expansion of B cells, where they differentiate into plasma cells that are going to be specific for that antigen. We're going to go more into depth about that in another one, so don't worry too much about it. Just make sure you're getting all the information that's presented on the slides. So continuing on the initiation of adaptive immunity, if an antigen is presented on an antigen presenting cell in association with MHC class 2, so shown on the image on the right, on an MHC class 2 receptor, then a helper T cell will trigger a humoral response, and this helper T cell is going to have the T cell receptor and the CD4 co-receptor. Meanwhile, if an antigen is presented on an antigen presenting cell in association with MHC class 1 receptor, then shown on the image to the left, that's going to form a relationship with a cytotoxic T cell, which is going to form a complement to the antigen on the MHC class 1 with their T cell receptor and the CD8 co-receptor. So the important takeaway is that in both cases, it's a T cell initiating the adaptive immune response. So it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the cellular adaptive response or the humoral adaptive response. Both of these responses are being triggered by either a CD4 helper T cell or a CD8 cytotoxic T cell detecting an antigen on their respective MHC receptors on the antigen presenting cells.